start reading. So, it's here. Okay, you can read.
To read.
Yes.
This is the goal. We have seen also what are the essentials of the method. But here, we have first to consider briefly one side of the question of method, which we have hitherto left untouched. In the system of an integral yoga, the principle must be that all life is a part of the yoga. But the knowledge which we have been describing seems to be not the knowledge of what is ordinarily understood as life, but of something behind life. There are two kinds of knowledge: that which seeks to understand the apparent phenomenon of existence externally by an approach from outside through the intellect. This is the lower knowledge, the knowledge of the apparent world. Secondly, the knowledge which seeks to know the truth of existence from within. It is in its source and reality by spiritual realization. Ordinarily, a sharp distinction is drawn between the two, and it is supposed that when we get to the higher knowledge, the God knowledge, then the rest, the world knowledge, becomes of no concern to us. But in reality, they are two sides of one seeking. All knowledge is ultimately the knowledge of God, through himself, through nature, through her works. Mankind has first to seek this knowledge through the external life, for until its mentality is sufficiently developed, spiritual knowledge is not really possible, and in proportion as it is developed, the possibilities of spiritual knowledge become richer and fuller.
So what Selva is saying here is very interesting. He's saying that we have been describing the spiritual life, but we have not paid enough attention to work in the physical world, because the integral yoga does accept that life should not be, we should not run away from life. Okay. So in that case, to be efficiently living in the physical world, you need knowledge of the physical world. And that we have not been doing. We have been describing only the psychological necessities of the spiritual life, inwards and not outwards. So that's what he is discussing now. Okay. So let's look at the language so that we understand what he's saying. So he's saying first, 1 second. Yeah, I have to get the text. $512. Yeah. So this is the goal. What he means is that we have to understand the highest levels, also the lowest levels. We are not going to reject the lowest levels. But if you don't reject the lower levels, then you have to live in the world. Your living also must become efficient and correct. Because if you are not in, you don't have knowledge of the physical world, then your actions are likely to be wrong because you don't have the knowledge. So that's what we're discussing. This is the goal. We have seen also what are the essentials of the method that we have seen. Mainly, you have to get rid of attachment, desire, ego, and you have to have aspiration. You must surrender. You must reject all that is wrong in you. They are the triple methods which he has described in so many ways. You have to have equality. You must have absolutely non-attachment to bottom line life. It's all in the well-known. So, if you want to sum up Swayanambhu's integral yoga, you can do it in two ways. One he is described in the mother, and the other he is described in so many places. So, one is like the Gita's, get rid of attachment, desire, and ego. This is one. Attachment, desire, and ego belong to level 1 in the normal life, and it is accepted by everybody. But it should not be accepted by the person who is interested in an integral yoga. Not even integral yoga, any yoga. They have to get rid of attachment, desire, and ego. Then, what about the other? What he described in the mother? He says, aspiration above. Vertically up, constantly think of mother and aspiration. Then at the physical level, surrender to the divine. All the events that happen to you, whether they are pleasant or unpleasant, accept it as though it is coming from the divine and it is intended to teach you something. Even the unpleasant experiences are most often teach you more than the pleasant ones. Okay? Pleasant ones make you very complacent and you say you are happy. But when an unpleasant appears, then you start wondering and thinking. So it's more of an encouragement, a goad. It is pushing you towards understanding why this problem came. So these are the descriptions. This is the goal. We have seen also what are the essentials of the method. So just now I told you about the essentials. Okay? 6 essentials. Attachment, ego, desire to go away. I'm repeating. Aspiration, surrender, and rejection. Rejection of all that is wrong in you, you have to identify and reject. Surrender, accept patiently, calmly, and turn towards the divine for whatever is happening in the physical world. Acceptance is a very dangerous word because you have to have understanding of the right way. Somebody wrote to Srimdo, now I have understood what is the integral yoga. Don't have any desire, but whatever comes to you by itself, accept very willingly. So Srimdo says, certainly not. Suppose someone gives you a bottle of scotch, whiskey, you will take it happily. So you have to use discrimination. Good morning, Yasmin. So that is the, so you have to use
Bonjour.
Yeah, bonjour. I hope you are well today.
Absolutely, with Mother's grace.
Oh, wonderful. Very nice. So you got the place now? We are discussing the what Srimdo is written in the
Yes, and I have the book also with me.
Oh, wonderful.
So I can read next if you want.
Okay, let's see how it goes. Okay, so, but we have to first consider briefly one side of the question of method, which we have hitherto left untouched. And what is that? In the system of the integral yoga, the principle must be that all life is part of the yoga. In other words, even what you're doing in the physical world is part of the yoga. It is not necessarily so in the other yogas. But in yoga, whether you are a doctor or an engineer or whatever you are, a surgeon or whatever, it is part of your spiritual life. You have to do it in the as a sacrifice to the divine. When I give you this, the 6 principles, I left out the sacrifice, which is the most important. The sacrifice is a consecration of all that you do to the divine. Okay, so the principle of yoga must be that all life is part of yoga. But the knowledge which we have been describing seems to be not the knowledge of what is ordinarily understood as life, but of something behind life. We have been discussing the psychological laws that one must employ in a spiritual life, but not practically. We have not been speaking about how to treat a patient or how to rectify a defect in a motorcycle or how to use the phone. We have not been discussing that. Okay, so that's what's in this. There are 2 kinds of knowledge. That which seeks to understand the apparent phenomenon of existence externally by an approach from outside through the intellect. Very clear. This is a scientific way of knowledge. Okay? It is valid at its own level. It is more than valid. There are 2 kinds of knowledge. One which is seeking, going outward through the senses and using the mind. It is external, oriented externally. Of course it is useful, because if it is not, then how will you treat a patient? How will you build a bridge? How will you use your phone? You have to have knowledge of the physical world and its laws. This is the lower knowledge. Now, when he's saying lower knowledge, don't impute any value to lower. You can take it as only a definition, okay? Because Srimdo does not give it a pejorative sense. Okay? This is a lower knowledge, is in a way to explain to you the knowledge of the apparent world. The world that as you see it is only apparent, because behind the forms there is a divine presence. So it is only apparent world that you are seeing. But if you want to see the divine presence even in the physical world, then it doesn't become apparent anymore. Okay? So the knowledge is the apparent world. Secondly, the knowledge which seems to know the truth of existence from within, in its source and reality, by spiritual realization. This is the higher knowledge. So there is a difference between the higher knowledge and the lower knowledge. Lower knowledge, as I said, don't give any pejorative sense to it. It is equally important. Okay? Ordinarily, a sharp distinction is drawn between the two. And it is supposed that when we get to the higher knowledge, the God knowledge, then the rest, the world knowledge, becomes of no concern to us. That's what usually people think. In fact, to such an extent that I don't even need to wear clothes. Okay? What is the use? I have the higher knowledge, I know what God is, so I don't need all these things. But in reality, there are two sides of one seeking. So you should know everything in the physical world also. All knowledge is ultimately the knowledge of God through himself, through nature, through her works. So in other words, so knowledge of God can be of three types. The transcendent, through himself, the individual, through nature, the cosmic. So you must know, that's the integral yoga. You must know God transcendentally, universally, as well as individually. Transcendentally will give you knowledge, universally will give you also knowledge, and also it will give you the nature of the divine. And through yourself, through your own being, you will get the devotion to the Lord. Through her works. Through her works is again the karma yoga. Okay, so mankind has first to seek this knowledge through the external life. That is the most, that's the first. Ordinary people have to do that. That's why we get educated in schools and colleges. For until its mentality is sufficiently developed, spiritual knowledge is not really possible. And in proportion as it is developed, the possibilities of spiritual knowledge become richer and fuller. So, but Sridhar seems to be saying that you have to be very careful here what he's saying. Look carefully. Mankind has first to seek this knowledge through the external life. That's a general rule. That's why education is so important and being recognized all over the world. In fact, in India now, there is one of the rights is the right to education. You have a fundamental right. You can demand that of the government. And if they don't make sufficient schools even in villages, it is the responsibility of the government. They have failed. Okay? So, right to education is absolutely essential. Mankind has first to seek this knowledge through the external life. It is very clear. For until its mentality is sufficiently developed, okay? Note the words, mentality is sufficiently developed. Spiritual knowledge is not possible. I mentioned this because take so many people who were illiterate. So then, don't they qualify for spiritual life? So you must not misunderstand. So I'm saying very clearly, mentality is sufficiently developed. You can have a very mental development without formal education. Okay, there are very interesting cases. One is the what is his name? Ramakrishna. He never went through education. He could just write his name in Bengali. Okay? And also Sai Baba, the one who was not much is known about him, but it is doubtful whether he had any education. Okay? Even Raman Maharshi only also had partial education. Sri Aurobindo is an exception. Not only education, but what education, my God, at the highest level. That's very unusual. It's not usual. And also remember another thing, Jiddu Krishnamurti, okay? He failed most of his exams. He didn't have a developed mind in the beginning. So, in education is necessary to develop the mind. But if your mind is already developed sufficiently, you don't need education for a spiritual life. Okay? Anyway, that's a little side story. which one has to understand in the curriculum. For until its mentality is sufficiently developed, spiritual knowledge is not really possible. Note interestingly how many of our illiterate farmers in India and the villagers, they are very intelligent. They have a very developed mentality. Okay, only the opportunity of education is not there. So now we go to the next. So if you have the education, naturally Chandra is saying the possibilities of spiritual life become richer and fuller. That's very obvious. Okay, so we go to the next one. And since Yasmin has offered to read, she can. And the third one,
Science,
yeah, go ahead.
science, art, philosophy, ethics, psychology, the knowledge of man and his past, action itself are means by which we arrive at the knowledge of the workings of God through nature and through life. At first, it is the workings of life and forms of nature which occupy us. But as we go deeper and deeper and get a completer view and experience, each of these lines brings us face to face with God. Science, at its limits, even physical science, is compelled to perceive in the end the infinite, the universal, the spirit, the divine intelligence and will in the material universe. Still, more easily must this be the end with the psychic science, which deals with the operation of higher and subtler planes and powers of our being and come into contact with the beings and phenomena of the worlds behind which are unseen, not sensible by our physical organs, but ascertainable by the subtle mind and senses. Art leads to the same end. The aesthetic human being, intensely preoccupied with nature through aesthetic emotion, must in the end arrive at spiritual emotion and perceive not only the infinite life, but the infinite presence within her. Preoccupied with beauty in the life of man, he must be in the end come to see the divine, the universal, the spiritual in humanity. Philosophy, dealing with the principles of things, must come to perceive the principle of all these principles and investigate its nature, attributes, and essential workings. So, ethics must eventually perceive that the law of good which it seeks is the law of God and depends on the being and nature of the master of the law. Psychology leads from the study of mind and the soul in living beings to the perception of the one soul and one mind in all things and beings. The history and study of man, like the history and study of nature, leads towards the perception of the eternal and universal power and being whose thought and will work out through the cosmic and human evolution. Action itself forces us into contact with the divine power, which works through, uses, overrules our actions. The intellect begins to perceive and understand, the emotions to feel and desire and revere, the will to turn itself to the service of God, without whom nature and man cannot exist or move, and by the conscious knowledge of whom alone we can arrive at our highest possibilities.
So Swami in the para is describing the lower knowledge. And he has given a list and he is discussing each list and defining it. So it's very easy what he's saying. We quickly go. If any question arises, we can discuss it. Otherwise, I'll just go on reading and then just reading. Okay. So all this is the lower knowledge. Science, art, philosophy, ethics. Now, ethics also is what is good, what is bad. So that also is, you think that it's a higher knowledge, but it is not. Morality is not a spiritual knowledge. Okay. Psychology. You would also think that psychology is a higher knowledge and not the lower, but certainly very clearly saying that this is all lower knowledge. The knowledge of man and his past, history, action itself are means by which we arrive at the knowledge of the workings of God through nature and through life. So he has put science 1, art 2, philosophy 3, ethics 4, psychology 5, knowledge of man and past history 6, action 7. So these 7 things he is going to discuss in this longish paragraph. Okay? So one by one. We arrive at first, it is the workings of life and the forms of nature which occupy us. But as we go deeper and deeper and get a completer view of the experience, each of these lines brings us face to face with God. So note that even science will bring you face to face with God. Art also, definitely. Philosophy also, ethics, psychology, even history, he is saying, and even action will all lead you finally, not immediately. Yes. Science, now he is describing one by one. The first one, science. At its limits, even physical science is compelled to perceive in the end the infinite, the universal, the spirit, the divine intelligence and will in the material universe. Okay? Now this is very interesting because Mother says the same thing. The science there's one thing which science has got which is fantastic. It is its sincerity to know. It is that which drives it. It is absolutely honest that I want to know. And that's why it goes on looking. They will to know. And naturally, if the will to know is there, one day it will cross the physical and spill on to the psychological. And that's exactly what has happened now. So many scientists are questioning the values of science and are understanding that consciousness is fundamentally much more important than matter. And many scientists are the internet is full of all these experiences, okay, of scientists. But still, just knowing that consciousness is the only truth is not enough. So there's a lot of ignorance also of those who rise to the second level of the spiritual place. They get some experience, but their conclusions are often wrong because they don't have theoretical knowledge of what Sri is saying, which is the total. If they know theoretically even the total, then their experiences they will place in the right way. But they don't do that. Science at its limit. Anything? Okay. Science at its limits, even physical science, is compelled to perceive in the end, not the beginning, the infinite, the universal, the spirit, the divine intelligence and will in the material universe. Still more easily must this be the end with the psychic sciences. So definitely the psychic sciences, ethics and psychology and philosophy are definitely more inward than physical science. And physical science also, there are so many sciences. There is physics, there is chemistry, there is metallurgy, there are so many other things. Okay, so these are all science, so many different angles. Study of matter, study of life, which is medicine, study of even mental science, even that we have now. The doctors are even treating mental diseases. They have neem humps in Bangalore. So, where many of some of our sadhaks were sent. Maybe you don't know that. Okay, but they were sent there. Anyway, so that's what Sri said. Still more easily must just be the end with the psychic sciences. I think sociology could be considered a psychic science. Although it is more material based nowadays in America, psychology means how does the society respond to the laws and respond to everything. And very often it is connected with police work. Okay, I know because one of my friends, Rukshal, who is a Parsi, his sister is a psychologist in America, and she is studying more how to help the police. They absolutely knows nothing spiritual about psychology in the West. Okay? So, anyway, so Sridhar is saying it is easier for the psychic sciences to deal with the operations of higher and subtler planes and powers of our being. Note also interestingly that occultism also is a law of the higher planes, but it's not necessarily spiritual. You can just use these laws for your own benefit. Okay? Like the stone throwing in the ashram, guest house. Of our being and come into contact with the beings and phenomena of the worlds behind, which are unseen. So that's exactly occultism. With the beings and phenomena of the world behind, which are unseen, not sensible by our physical organs, but ascertainable by the subtle mind and senses. In science, he tell you that there are two types. So even in science, he has given you the physical sciences and the psychic sciences. But psychic does not mean anything to do with the psychic being. It means, in English, normally it means psychological. Okay? So psychological, like ethics, morality, psychology, even religious theology, all these things are also all psychic sciences. Which deal with the operations of higher and subtle planes and powers of our being and come into contact with the beings and phenomena. So note the word beings. There are beings in all these worlds. There are beings in the subtle physical, there are beings in the vital world, beings in the mental world, and above also. So you come into contact with these beings and the phenomena. There are also actions that take place and the laws of these worlds, which are seen by subtle senses, not by physical objects, but ascertainable by the subtle mind and senses. Now it comes to art. Okay? Art leads to the same end. Ultimately, it will lead you to God, because you are going through the aspect of beauty. And if beauty is there, necessarily also joy will be there. Okay? Bliss, beauty, these three things go together normally. No? Beauty, joy, and what else? One more. They always go.
Love.
Love, that's right. Love, that's right. So love, beauty, and joy always go together, even in the physical world. Okay, so the aesthetic human being, we're discussing art, that's why, the aesthetic human being, intensely preoccupied with nature through aesthetic emotion, must in the end arrive at spiritual emotion and perceive not only the infinite life, but the infinite presence within her, within nature. Okay? Preoccupied with beauty in the life of man, he must in the end come to see the divine, the universal, the spiritual in humanity. To see the divine in the universal and in humanity. So again, he is coming to this same thing. To see the divine, transcendental, universal divine, cosmic, and spiritual in humanity, individual. So you have to come to know ultimately the divine in all the three levels. Now it comes to philosophy. Philosophy, dealing with the principles of things, must come to perceive the principle with a P cap of all these principles and investigate its nature, attributes, and essential workings. So what is this principle that he's talking about? Obviously God. Or if you want to be more precise, Satchidananda. Okay? The PCAP principle. That is the main. And from there all come the lowercase principles, minor principles. Be honest, don't tell lies, okay? Be sincere, okay? Be frank, all these principles. Investigate its nature, attributes, and essential workings. Now it comes to ethics. Okay? Ethics must eventually, ethics is clear, na? Morality. That which is good and that which is bad. And that's a very interesting discussion, but we'll keep that for another time. So ethics must eventually perceive that the law of good which it seeks is the law of God. Ultimately, it has to discover that it is God that makes all the laws and depends on the being and nature of the master of the law. When he is talking of the master of the law, he is talking of the third level, the Purushottama or the Ishvara, with a name cap. And master is always individual. He is a personal aspect of the divine. Okay. Now he comes to psychology. Psychology leads from the study of mind and the soul in living beings to the perception of the one soul and the soul in living beings, to the perception of the one soul and one mind in all things and beings. I don't think I read that correctly. Psychology leads from the study of mind and the soul in living beings to the perception of the one soul and one mind in all things and beings. That's a cosmic consciousness. When you start seeing that your mind is part of the universal mind, your body is part of universal matter. So that's what psychology must lead to that. The history, now it comes to history. History and study of man, like the history and study of nature, lead towards the perception of the eternal and universal power and being whose thought and will work out through the cosmic and human evolution. That's a history. Now it comes to action. Action itself forces us into contact with the divine power. He is using an interesting word, action, but what he means is karma. Karma of in anything. Karma of medicine, karma of engineering, karma of history, karma of anything, everything, all is karma. Itself forces us into contact with the divine power, which works through, uses, overrules our actions. So, the real power starts from the highest level. It is delegated to the universal nature, and universal nature also, finally, at the individual nature also, it is using its power. Now, the intellect. Here he is talking about action, intellect, and will. So, action belongs to the physical, the intellect belongs to the mind, and the will later on will belong to the vitality. So, action itself forces us into contact with the divine power, which works through, uses, overrules our actions. The intellect, the mind, begins to perceive and understand the emotions, to feel and desire and revere. So, not revere is to give respect to, but also there is also a little bit of adoration also in the reverence. Okay, revere is a verb. The will, now he is coming to the will, to turn itself to the service of the divine, without whom nature and man cannot exist or move, and by conscious knowledge of whom alone we can arrive at our highest possibilities. So he has been describing the outer, the lower knowledge. Okay, so we have got, we have come to 8:33. Maybe we can read just the next one. We can discuss it maybe next time. So, how big is it? Here the yoga section. Not a very big one, it's very small. Kiran, would you like to read? Are you there today or you are not there?
Yes, Rangada.
It's a very small para, you can read it. It is here that
Yes,
yoga.
yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
It is here that yoga steps in. It begins by using knowledge, emotion, and action for the possession of the divine. For yoga is the conscious and perfect seeking of union with the divine, towards which all the rest was an ignorant and imperfect moving and seeking. At first, then yoga separates itself from the action and method of the lower knowledge. For while this lower knowledge approaches God indirectly from outside and never enters his secret dwelling place, yoga calls us within and approaches him directly, while that seeks him through the intellect and becomes conscious of him from behind a veil. Yoga seeks him through realization, lifts the veil, and gets the full vision, where that only feels the presence and the influence. Yoga enters into the presence and fills itself with the influence, where that is only aware of the workings and through them gets some glimpse of the reality. Yoga identifies our inner being with the reality and sees from that the workings. Therefore, the methods of yoga are different from the methods of the lower knowledge.
It's a very small para. He is describing, in a gist, we can say that the lower knowledge uses the senses and goes outwards. This is his character. He uses the senses and the mind to come to conclusions. And it is always directed outwards into the universe. But in spiritual knowledge, yoga is exactly the opposite. It does not use the senses. Rather, it discourages use of senses. It says control your senses and don't let them affect you. And you go inwards and you don't use your gross senses. You can use your subtle senses and you will go inwards into surrender. Okay? So that's a basic difference between the two. One goes outward and uses gross senses. The other goes inwards and uses subtle senses, if at all. Okay? So this is the difference. The next time we will go a little, we'll read it. Okay, next time. It is here that yoga steps in. Yoga is the one that, having the outer knowledge, you start going inwards. So this we will read next time. It is here that yoga steps in. Okay? That's all. We've come to the end of our maybe 8:40.
Thank you, Rangada. Thanks, Rangada.
Thank you, Rangada.